Welcome to KidneyCAN's Partners in Progress. Thank you all for joining us tonight on clinical trials with patients and doctors. And I thank you all to the audience. There's 147 registrants from 28 states and 14 countries, including Australia, Brazil, Canada, Egypt, Taiwan, Uganda, Poland, and the UK. So thank you for around the globe attending tonight's town hall. To those of you who are part of the grassroots army who met with their congressional representatives on March 11th and 12th and advocated for the $60 million for the kidney cancer research program, I want to say a big thank you. We got 50 million, but we're going to keep fighting for 60. So thank you very much. Our next fall advocacy days are going to take place September 16th and 17th. And so we encourage everyone in our audience to use their voice to advocate for kidney cancer research funding. And for more information on how to get involved, please email our legislative patient advocate, our own Deb Beyhan. She's right here tonight. Her email address will be dropped in the chat, hopefully about right now. So please send a message to Deb. So tonight we're going to be covering several topics, including clinical trial basics, how to find a trial, trial experience, and the lessons learned. And so this town hall is going to be available on our YouTube channel in about 3 or 4 days. So look for an email with the link if you want to share it with others. And especially want to thank our sponsors, Aveo, BMS, ASI, Exelix, and Merck. We couldn't have done it without you. But more importantly, thank you to our panelists. And tonight we've got Dr. Bradley McGregor from Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, medical oncologist. Thank you, Dr. McGregor, for joining us. And also Dr. Naomi Haas from Abramson Cancer Center at the University of Pennsylvania, just down the road here in Philadelphia. Thank you, Dr. Haas, for joining us. We've also got 2 great patient advocates joining us tonight, Deb Beyhan and Laura Esfeller. And a big giant shout out to all 4 of you for advocating for kidney cancer research funding, the KCRP. Thank you so much. So today we're going to be talking to our panelists about why a patient may want to participate in a clinical trial. And we'll discuss these basics and the points that doctors and patients take into consideration when making the decision to join a clinical trial. And then we'll finish off with the lessons learned. So here we go. We're diving into topic number 1, trial basics. I'm going to start with the doctors. So both of you are very active in clinical trials and trial design. In fact, your institutions are considered premier places to find a clinical trial. So we're really grateful that both of you are sharing your personal experiences and your viewpoints today. So thank you both. We're going to start with the basics again. There's some in our audience who don't know much about clinical trials. So Dr. McGregor, starting with you, can you tell us what is a clinical trial and why does kidney cancer need trials?
Yeah, no, thanks so much. Excited to be here with everyone online. When we think about clinical trials, they're not important just in kidney cancer, they're important in all cancers, right? As we come up with a new idea, we have scientists in the lab that found a new pathway, which we think is going to be really important for that treatment of that cancer. We really need to learn about that pathway. We need to learn about that drug. So that drug is developed in order to get the knowledge about how that drug works in patients with cancer. Is this a good idea? Is this going to be effective? We do clinical trials. And there's a wide variety of clinical trials. And as a drug is sort of developed, there's different stages of clinical trials. And so we think of it as phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And as each clinical trial is designed, our goal is ultimately to advance care and help our patients. But each trial has a sort of a specific goal, right? So when we have a phase 1, that's the earliest trial. The real goal of the phase 1 trial is to find out, is this drug safe? Can we give this drug? What is the right dose of the drug that can be given? Once that's sort of found, we have some proof that it's safe, we have the right dose. Then we move on to a phase 2 trial, where the whole goal of a phase 2 trial is, how active is this drug? What does it look like overall? What is the response rate? How well are patients doing with it? But as we think about, will the FDA or European regulatory agencies say, hey, this is enough? We need to go to this phase 3 drug where we say, okay, this is the new drug. How does this compare against what we're doing right now? And that's when we start to have this randomization in the phase 3. We say, hey, we're going to test the new kid on the block, this new idea, versus the standard of care, whatever that may be. That's the phase 3 trial.
So let me jump in and ask, just for clarification, before we ask Dr. Haas, you said phase 1, 2, and 3. Can you also equate that to early stage versus late stage and break that down for the audience?
Yeah, so the lower the number, the earlier the stage, right? So the phase one trials are the drugs that are we're sort of just testing out the drug in the clinic. And then when we get to phase two, we've sort of found that right dose. We are establishing how active it is. And phase three is sort of the last trial, hopefully before approval, where we're looking to compare that drug against what historically may have been the standard of care.
Great, great. Dr. Haas, could you tell us about one of the kidney cancer trials at UPenn at your institution and why you all chose to participate in that trial?
Sure. So one of the trials that we have open is a combination of two immune drugs, ipilimumab and nivolumab, which your audience might know as Yervoy and Opdivo. And it's combined with another pill drug, which is an adenosine inhibitor called ciforadenant. And the reason that we chose this trial, this is for patients with clear cell kidney cancer that has spread to other parts of the body. And there were several reasons why we chose this as a trial. One is the patients that we see at Penn often first we look at, is there a need? Is it a trial that a study that a lot of patients are going to be interested in? So it takes some work to open a trial. There's a lot of regulatory hoops and stuff. So we want to make sure that it's a trial that's attractive to a lot of patients and that we can serve our community. One of the reasons that I particularly like this trial is it's what we call pragmatic. In other words, it's pretty practical. It doesn't have a lot of extra visits that patients have to come for visits. It's easy to enroll in, and it's exciting because it's asking if we can increase the number of responses that we see in patients. So in addition to kind of increase the efficacy of the ipi-nivo. So those are some of the reasons that we chose that trial.
Great, great. So before we dive in a little bit deeper, can you just comment on the larger picture? Are there some important questions that are out there that today's trials need to answer that we should be looking for?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important to both patients and doctors is, can we cure more patients? Can we make, when we treat metastatic disease, can we have more shrinkage of disease and make the disease completely go away in more patients than we see? Because if we can make the cancer completely go away or get close to what we call a deep response, then it actually might allow some patients to come off of treatment and have a treatment break for a while. And some of those patients might be able to go for quite a long time without having to be on another treatment.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Haas. Dr. McGregor, we're going to turn it over to some audience questions in just a second, but could you tell us regarding the rarer subtypes of kidney cancer, what are some of the special challenges when you think about designing or enrolling those trials?
Yeah, I mean, when we think about these rare subtypes of kidney cancer, we used to say we had what was clear cell, which is, 80% of kidney cancer. Then we had non-clear cell. We sort of thought of them all this same big group, but we now know that that's really doing a disservice, right? So these other cancers that are not a clear cell are a wide variety of tumors with very different reasons for why they grow and different pathways that promote their growth. And so as we think about this, designing those trials is really challenging because these are rare. They're those patients, the disease is not as common. And so designing a large trial to compare a new drug versus an old drug when you have a very limited number of patients have the disease can be very challenging. So how do we do that? Do we look to design tumors based on each type of tumor, or do we put them all together and try to see where do we see what does one type of tumor respond better than other type of tumors? And I think both approaches are being done. There's an ongoing trial with Sameta, which is looking at MET-driven papillary tumors, so very specific tumors, where we're looking at different combinations. And at the same time, we have trials which are including a lot of different rare kidney tumors and trying to see, does this combination work? And if it does, is there one group that works better than the other? But it's certainly a challenge. And even within the clinical trial development as a whole, we're still struggling with that very question. Are we like a lumper? Are we put them all together, or do we split them out? And if we do a splitter, how can we really enroll patients and get the answer quickly so we can actually help our patients?
Great, great. Well, we're going to do something different tonight at this town hall. We usually bring up folks live on camera to ask the questions, but because we got quite a few tonight, we're just going to have Deb and Laura ask some of those questions on their behalf. So Deb, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Dr. Haas and Dr. McGregor, for sharing part of your evening today with the kidney cancer community, because this is such a big topic for us. And I have a question from Katrinka. She's a patient from California, and I was wondering if you could address what we as a patient community can do to help increase the number of trials for rare subtypes. And what are the special needs to create a trial in these rare subtypes?
So I think one of the important things, if I might add, is really patient advocacy. So if you have a good experience with the clinical trial, to talk about it in your groups. And certainly we really welcome patient participation in the various groups we belong to. And I actually get a lot of feedback from my patients in clinic about their trial experiences. So, we sometimes say that if you have a bad experience, people tend to tell more people about it if they have a bad experience. So what we want you to do is we also want you to tell more people if you have a good experience with the trial.
Yes, I mean, just like eating at a restaurant, right? They're going to get the bad reviews. They're going to be louder. Dr. McGregor, did you want to add anything to what
I think
Dr. Haas says?
the most important thing is just, have your voice heard and say, hey, we want a clinical trial in this space. I think one of, the feedback we get about trials, like, well, there's not enough patients. There's not going to be people enrolling on that trial. So, as patients, you make your voice heard. Say, hey, I have this rare type. I'm excluded from all the trials. What are we doing for me? And the more those voices are heard, the easier it is to get support to run these trials, right? And I think we can do these trials. It's been shown that when we work together as a community of patients, physicians, and industry, we can do these trials in these rare subtypes. And it's just important that those voices get heard, so the right people can take those steps.
Well, we'll continue to urge our patients in our community to reach out to their doctors and let their voices be heard. But I'm going to turn it over to Laura now. She has another question.
Thank you so much, Deb. And thank you again to Dr. Haas and Dr. McGregor for participating in this. Just had a question from Pavel, a caregiver in Poland, who wanted to know how many people need to be enrolled in a trial to get accurate results and a new type of treatment approved, and how does this number change for rare subtypes?
So I don't think the number changes for rare subtypes. I think that, when we're in a situation where the data is harder to come by, we may accept lower numbers to say, hey, we're moving the needle forward. Obviously, we work with statisticians, and the larger the data set, the more robust the data set, the more patients are included, the more confident we can feel that the results are real and it's not due to chance. There's always that fine line of, wanting to have enough confidence, but then not taking forever to get the results, right? And so I think that's where we often work with our statisticians and, regulatory agencies to say, hey, what is going to be needed to really prove that this can be effective? But often we start very small numbers. We see that, hey, this looks like it's very encouraging. And then we make a slightly larger trial, and then we go larger and larger to try to get a definitive answer.
So basically, the earlier trials would have a smaller number. The later stage trials would have a larger number.
Right. In order to change the standard of care, a phase 3 trial, you need, generally in the order of hundreds of patients. But I mean, one really good example is belzutifan, or Welireg, as people know it. And that was the trial that actually first got FDA approval by looking at a small number of patients with von Hippel-Lindau disease. And then it very rapidly jumped to a large trial where it was first a smaller trial in patients who didn't have VHL but had clear cell, but then very quickly to a large trial that was comparing it to everolimus.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I have another question from Margaret from Oxfordshire in the UK. I'm sure I did not pronounce that correctly, but a lot of our patients are older, mid 60s, 70s. And her question is, why are stage 4 patients over 70 years of age less likely to be enrolled in a trial? Is there a reason for that?
There might be a little bit of a bias. I certainly don't practice ageism. I'm trying very hard when I meet with a patient to basically make sure that their health is good. So I think some of it is, perhaps we need to do a better job of educating both our other doctors and the community in general that if you're healthy, there's no reason why you shouldn't participate in a clinical trial.
There might be something to do with already existing comorbidities or something that would make it more impossible for them to join the trial. Thank you very much. I'm gonna shoot this over to Brian then for topic 2 on how to find a trial.
Great, thanks, Deb. Yeah, and thank you, doctors. Appreciate that insight. So we're going to talk a little bit. We've stuck with the first bit on the basics, and now we're talking about finding a trial. We'll try to stick to the facts of who, what, and where here. And now that we've got the 2 patient forum members who both are clinical trial participants, so we're going to hear how their experience began. So I'm going to ask Laura to step up here. Laura, before you start, you knew you had a rare kidney cancer. Does having a rare subtype make the process of finding a trial different?
I think it does. For me, I had stage 4 papillary, which is related to a HLRCC or hereditary leiomyomatosis and renal cell cancer diagnosis. And whenever I was diagnosed in 2016, there wasn't a standard of care for metastatic papillary patients. So for me, they're really, at least from my conversations with my physicians and kind of evaluating the landscape at the time, there wasn't anything that was standard of care that would really kind of correlate to an easy, quote unquote, I'm using that in quotations, an easy decision, right? And so that, I think it does change the landscape a little bit and perhaps push me to do a clinical trial more. I was more willing to do it because I knew that it was probably my best chance for a great outcome.
So can you tell us the name of that trial? Did it have a name and call sign?
It did, yes. So it was called PAPMET. It was sponsored by SWOG and SWOG S1500, and it was the first randomized clinical trial for papillary kidney patients. I enrolled in September of 2016, so I was one of the earlier patients to enroll. And I found out about it from my oncologist, Dr. Vogelzang, who had recommended for me to consider as an option. We discussed it together and agreed that it was really going to be the best thing that I should do. And I enrolled from there. So it was a randomized trial of 4 different medications. I wasn't able to choose which one I was assigned to, but I was assigned to Cabometyx, and that was what I took.
So real quickly, from first conversation with Dr. Vogelzang to enrolling, what was the time frame? Can you share any details?
Yeah, my first conversation with him. So my first scans after my surgery, I had a radical nephrectomy, was in June of 2016. My first scans after surgery were August. And so it was about, I actually had to change oncologists. I was seeing someone in Los Angeles in moved my care back to Las Vegas, where I was living at the time. So my first appointment with Dr. Vogelzang was that August, and I enrolled in the trial in September. So it was about a month. I had to do some pre-screens like EKG and making sure I was healthy enough to join the trial, and then was enrolled in about a month's time.
Thank you. And I'm going to push a little bit here. So during that time, you must have been thinking a lot of different alternatives scenarios. What were there any certain key instances that moved you over to say, I'm going to enroll?
I think for me, the biggest was my honest and frank conversations with my oncologist really made the difference for me. I had received a different recommendation from my initial oncologist at UCLA, who, had a great recommendation. It was another TKI, but Dr. Vogelzang really felt strongly that it would be better for me to do a clinical trial. And I had a lot of comfort and trust in him in order to make that decision. I also knew that my odds weren't great, but that I really felt strongly about my case being something that could potentially contribute to research and to future patients.
Great,
I think that's what pushed me over the edge.
So last question, before you went in and enrolled, and now with Monday morning quarterbacking hindsight, what was your understanding before and after, and is there a big difference?
It's a huge difference, Brian. Whenever I enrolled in the trial, I often say I didn't even understand the difference between immunotherapy and targeted therapy. So I thought maybe I was gonna be on immunotherapy. I just didn't know, right? And now I understand that, it's something that, I had a complete response to my treatment, so I'm incredibly lucky. And so obviously hindsight is 2020, and it's easy for me to say it was a great decision to join the trial. I don't regret that though. Even if I would have not had the outcome that I did, I still think it's an incredibly important piece of the landscape whenever you're discussing clinical trial or discussing treatment options with your physician. And I always encourage patients to at least see what's out there.
Great. Thank you. Deb, you had a totally different experience finding a trial. Tell us about how you found your trial and what transpired.
Actually, my husband found the trial. I don't have one of the rare subtypes like Laura. I have regular run-of-the-mill clear cell RCC. If you're going to get kidney cancer, I have the generic brand. And when I was diagnosed, you've said it many times before, Brian, I was in the white noise phase. I just wanted the cancer out, had the surgery. A couple weeks later, my husband found a clinical trial at clinicaltrials.gov. And it happened to be in the city I was in. So he emailed that doctor. The doctor emailed back pretty quickly, we got an appointment for him. He was actually my second opinion doctor, but that second opinion actually happened before my first opinion was to take place. And the conversation I had with him was the turning point. I mean, I knew a little bit about clinical trials, but I just wanted the best treatment I could get. And I felt that his knowledge gave me those options.
So tell us a little bit more about this. I'm going to hear you dive in a little bit. So you were in the clinic and had 5 minutes, 15 minutes, a long time, phone calls. What transpired?
We actually had about 45 minutes, maybe closer to an hour. And he told me about the three options that I had. At the time, it was, in 2016, so the standard of care was Sutent. And he told me we could do the standard of care, or there were two different trial options. And one was the Javelin trial, which was actually, I wrote it down, I can't even pronounce it, avelumab and axitinib. It was a combination. It was an immunotherapy and a TKI combination versus Sutent. It was a randomized trial. And I had heard at that time, Jimmy Carter had melanoma, and he had been on immunotherapy, and he was doing great for a melanoma. And I thought, oh, I want to do it. I want to do immunotherapy, but it wasn't offered to kidney cancer patients at the time, unless you were on a trial. So I said, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go for this trial because Jimmy Carter's still kicking, and he's doing well. So I unfortunately I was randomized to the Sutin arm, but I chose to stay on the trial and not drop out of the trial because Sutin was going to be my option anyway if I didn't take the trial. So I was going to get much more monitoring. And as a new cancer patient, that's what you want. You want somebody to look at you every few weeks and make sure you're going to be alive tomorrow. I mean, literally, that's the fear that was in my heart.
So Dr. Haas,
And that's why I took it.
sorry, Dr. Haas, I'm coming to you next. I just want to ask Deb, so it sounds like the care you got in the trial was pretty awesome. Can you just dive in a little bit more of that? Were you going into local clinic to the hospital regularly?
Yes, I was going into the hospital. I am very fortunate. I live in Atlanta and it was in Emory. It's 20 minutes drive from my house. But I was going every 2 weeks to get blood work. But I could have gotten blood work closer to my house, but I wanted to see my doctor. I wanted to see his face to say, yeah, I'm reading your blood work. It's fine. You're alive tomorrow.
Great, great. So thank you both. Dr. Haas, so how do you suggest a trial to a patient for consideration? And a second question that's been asked by the audience is, can you drive non-US citizens to trials?
Okay, so I'll answer the first one first. And so I kind of keep myself oriented with my patients. I like paper. I'm not I can't just rely on the computer. So the first thing I wanted to say is that it's really important that a clinical trial decision is a shared decision, and any kind of treatment with a patient, it has to be a shared decision process between the patient and the doctor. I generally will write down on a piece of paper a list of all of the options that I think are appropriate for the patient. And in those, I'll include both kind of standard of care options, but I'll also write down the clinical trials that might be a good fit. And I try to explain what the differences are between, what's special about that clinical trial versus standard of care. But I also want to make sure that the patient understands what's different about the trial, what are perhaps the extra visits that would have to take place, and also how a patient might benefit, but also how it might just be for the greater good of the patient, and you might not for some of the things directly benefit. For example, if there's a biopsy that has to take place, or somebody's studying the tissue or the blood, you might not know right away, what's in that for you. So I think that's really how I approach it. And then the second question, if you can repeat that or clarify that.
We're just trying to understand, are trials open to other folks that are not in the United States?
Yeah, so it depends very much on the situation. So some industry trials are open both in the US and not in the US. And some cooperative group trials are also open in the US and not in the US. And sometimes we partner with somebody in a different country, and a trial might be open at two sites. And, it just depends a lot on the regulatory constraints.
So,
hope I'm answering.
Yeah, no, that helped. Thank you. Dr. Haas, just the last quick question before Dr. McGregor. So sitting there with the patient, Deb mentioned that she had about 45 minutes to an hour. Could you describe roughly the time that you have and your main goals when you're having that initial trial discussion with the patient?
So, when I see a new patient, I'm generally given an hour, but I sometimes have to kind of make time to spend some extra time, perhaps at a second visit. And often I'll speak to patients if it's not on a clinic day, just because I think it's really important to be able to have all of the information. I usually try to talk to the patient before I ask the research staff to come in so that they don't feel pressured to go on a clinical trial, and to really make sure they have their questions answered in advance.
Great, great. Thank you. Dr. McGregor, so if a patient comes into you from another center and they're interested in one of your trials, what's the first step they could take?
Yeah, so I mean, often we find out before they even come into the center, right? So, when we have trials, we'll often get calls to our institution, be like, hey, I have kidney cancer and have a rare type kidney cancer. I see you have a trial. Can we enroll in that? And they can find my email right on clinicaltrials.gov. So I'll get emails directly from the patients. And I'll work with the team, we'll reach out and we'll sort of get some basic ideas on what is going on. So, there is the opportunity through advocacy groups and everywhere to get that information and get in touch with the centers to see what trials are open and at least have a quick understanding of what's even available before you make that drive or that flight. And patients can enroll in trials no matter where they live. I think the main issue though is trials do require time and resources, and most of the trials will not pay for that travel and the extra visit that may be accompanied with it. And so there's always that risk of trials.
Great, great. Well, I'm going to throw out a Jeopardy analogy here with the answer, the answer is husband. And the question is, Deb, what's the best way for a patient to find an appropriate trial? That was a really bad joke. But anyway, I want to let everybody weigh in here. What is the best way for a patient to find an appropriate trial?
Well, for me, it was clinicaltrials.gov.
Laura?
Yeah. For me, it was, again, talking with my oncologist. I also just want to note really quickly, I think it's important that even if you aren't at, a standard, like an MD Anderson or what have you, right? There are sometimes some of these clinical trials are being offered in more community settings through NCORE, at least in the United States. So, definitely have that conversation with your oncologist, even if you aren't looking, even if you don't think, oh, this won't apply to me.
No.
I just wanted to mention one thing. When I saw in the chat, somebody was talking about the extra costs. And there is this Lazarex Foundation that we have that open at our institution. It's open at other institutions. And it's a foundation that wants to support patients participating in clinical trials. They don't pay up front, but if patients collect their receipts, they're reimbursed for things like transportation and housing and things like that.
Great, great. I'm going to skip us ahead here, Deb, to the audience questions and see if we can get a couple of those in before we move on to topic 3. We're running a little tight here, but Deb, you want to ask the next question?
Yes, and I think it's a pretty good question, and it's from Debbie in Montana. And if Dr. McGregor or Dr. Haas wants to ask it, what kind of factors could disqualify a person from a trial? And is each trial a little bit different?
Yeah, so each trial is really going to be different, right? I mean, the goal of a clinical trial is to advance care and, develop new regimens, while at the same time not exposing patients to unnecessary risk. So depending on that drug that we're studying, there may be unique side effects or risks that certain conditions may not allow, right? So if we look at immunotherapy, as immunotherapy is developed, if you had a history of autoimmune diseases, while we know it may be safe now to get outside a trial in the right situation, a lot of those were excluded because we didn't want them to run the risk of causing excessive harm, especially in a situation where the true benefits were unknown. A lot of the kidney cancer trials with a lot of the TKIs and the risk of bleeding and blood clots and heart, like some of those conditions may be excluded if they're within a certain period of time. And so I think that it really depends on the drug and what we know about the drug. The more we know about a drug, as further along its development, we feel much more comfortable about understanding what conditions can be successfully managed concurrent with that medication. So I know it often feels like I'm being excluded because of this, but ultimately, as the trial's designed, the goal really is to protect the patient and not subject them to unnecessary risks. And so, unfortunately, sometimes that may mean that trial may not be an option, but we're always working to learn more so we can make these trials options for all patients.
Great.
Yeah, and one time I heard Dr. Atkins speak, and he said it's better to find the right treatment than the fast treatment. Would you both agree to that when you're trying to decide on a clinical trial versus standard of care? Yes,
I
you would
think,
agree?
I mean, there's two parts to that question. So Dr. Atkins is also a great proponent of two dual immune therapies versus immune therapy with VEGF inhibitors, which are things like axitinib and stuff. So Ipi/Nivo takes a little longer to work than using a VEGF inhibitor with a immune checkpoint inhibitor. But I also think that you know, as far as the eligibility and stuff, you want to make sure that the right trial is one that you're going to feel good on in general, that your quality of life, I think, is not going to be too compromised. And I would say that the National Cancer Institute is really trying to make trials a little bit more inclusive. So being a little bit, when it's safe, being a little bit more lenient on some of the older eligibility criteria that used to be constraining patients.
All right.
Thank you.
Laura, you got a question?
I do. I have a great question from Paige, who's a patient in Missouri. Are you finding any biomarkers to help direct which clinical trial is best?
It's an ongoing struggle. I mean, I think, when we look at a lot of cancers, there's been so many advances in finding the right biomarker. And I think in kidney cancer, it's not for lack of trying, but we're certainly doing it. I mean, as Dr. Haas alluded to, like some of the trials, like belzutifan was approved based on that idea of BHL germline mutation led to that. But then if we look at the phase 3 trial of belzutifan, it was all patients with clear cells. So it wasn't biomarker selected because BHL mutations are sort of inherently associated with clear cell kidney cancer. And so we're constantly looking for biomarkers. We want to know, why is treatment A going to work better than treatment B? Is there some feature of the cancer or not? I think right now we're still trying. And we continue to try to figure this out through clinical trials in the lab with all of our partners, so we can hopefully, again, not say we think this is going to be the treatment that works, but say, hey, there's this marker that's really associated with a great response to this treatment. And so we can select the right treatment.
All right. Well, thank you for that. We got to keep moving along here. We're coming up on topic number 3, which is the trial experience. And we've got 2 right here that are going to tell us, and don't hold any punches here, Deb. So what were your questions and worries before you enrolled in your late stage trial, Deb?
I think my worries were basically about cancer treatment in general. I had told my doc, what if I didn't do anything? And that was my first question. What if I didn't do anything and I just lived my life? Because I just didn't want to be sick and, do all the stuff that came with the cancer thing. And his answer was, well, we're not there yet. And he used the word we, and I just couldn't believe it. We were partners. He was able to eliminate or alleviate all of my fears. And I just decided to move forward and I take the additional monitoring that a newly diagnosed patient just wants. And it was as simple as that. It was very simple for me.
Great. Thank you, Deb. Laura, how about for you? What some of the good and the bad and maybe the ugly?
All of the above, Brian. So, for me, I really, like Deb alluded to, I really appreciated the fact that I had not just my oncologist and his team on my case, but I had a clinical trial nurse that was assigned to me, from outside of his institution that was also closely monitoring my case. That gave me a lot of comfort. I also, because I was earlier on, to Deb's point as well, it was comforting to have 3-month scans because I knew what was happening at all times. I think that some of the downsides, were that I had to pay for my scans out of pocket, aside from what my insurance covered. And scans aren't cheap, right? I did at least have the drug covered, which was a huge benefit. I didn't have to pay for Cabo out of pocket, which was great, especially because I probably would have had to fight my insurance company at that time to get it approved because there wasn't really anything, pointing to that, at least as far as insurance was concerned at the time, right? So that was really beneficial to have that financial burden lifted. But, it did mean that I had to go into the doctor's office more frequently. I had, blood work done twice a week or twice a month in the beginning, and, additional scans and tests that I maybe wouldn't have necessarily had if I wouldn't have been in the trial, which again gave me some comfort, but also meant it was a disruption to my schedule. I went back to work while I was doing my treatment, and it meant rushing down to the doctor's office on my lunch breaks to try to squeeze in an appointment or testing, and that does take a toll.
Sure. So
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback off of what Laura said. My trial was a little bit different, designed a little bit differently. My insurance covered certain amount of scans, but my trial paid for the extra. So every trial is a little bit different. So I was not out of pocket of any additional scans at all.
Great. So for both of you, what do you want other patients, especially new patients, what do you want them to understand about the experience and the opportunity of clinical trials for them?
I think that, there's a misconception I hear a lot that if my doctor's talking to me about a clinical trial, that it means there's no hope. And I wish that we, did a better job of making sure that patients understood that it does not mean that it's your last option. It does not mean that, there's no more hope and that you're just, having a Hail Mary, right? These physicians like Dr. Haas and Dr. McGregor and many others that work on these clinical trials do so because they have a lot of data and other things backing up their hypotheses to lead to these clinical trials being developed, and there's a reason for that, and they do think that there is some patient benefit for putting us on these trials. So to me, I think that at every stage of your treatment journey, you should be kind of talking about whether or not a trial is appropriate for you. It may not be, right? A trial isn't always the answer, but it should at least be a part of the discussion, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Totally agree. I totally agree. I think this misconception of, it's the last resort. My doctor must think that there's nothing left for me. Is that misconception has to go away, because you're really going to get a benefit of possibly taking a drug that's not available to everybody at the moment, but you may get the benefit of that drug, and voila, you're doing well.
Great. So I'm going to ask Dr. Haas this one, if you wanted to add anything to that question, to pass on to new patients out there. But also, could you also touch on when should a patient consider an early phase trial?
Sure. So the first question was about
General experience that new patients should understand about the experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we try very hard to get a patient enrolled quickly on a clinical trial. It's there are some constraints that make it stressful for both the physicians and the patients. Because there's often rules about how old the scans are. And that to me is the biggest struggle. So I think the onus is on us to design trials also so that it is as easy as possible for patients to enroll. I think that Deb actually mentioned it very well about when to consider an early phase trial, I think one example is Opdivo or nivolumab. When it first became available, it was, so I think when a drug is very different than what's out there and looks promising, in the very even in the animal studies and the tissue culture studies, I think that that's important. And also, if the approach is different and it makes sense for a particular patient, those are reasons to consider an early phase trial. And the other, of course, is if you don't have another option. But sometimes even the early phase trials are more exciting and hold more promise than just going to another drug in that setting that you've already been on it.
Just Dr. McGregor touched on it earlier, but Dr. Haas, what do we know, or what's the general thoughts about the safety and the correct doses and the risks early on with these, or with the early phase trials, just so everybody understands?
I mean, so one is that it generally starts at a slightly lower dose than they think might be the right dose, because it's really important not to hurt patients. You don't want to have a setting where where somebody has a really, really bad surprise toxicity, and that's sometimes hard for patients to decide whether they're going to be that patient. Generally, I think, Brad, you can comment on this, but I generally will, if it's very early on, I'm going to pick somebody who's in really good health and has perhaps a slower growing cancer, so that if they don't benefit, they're not hurting themselves.
And Dr. McGregor, can you contrast the early phase to phase 3 and what we know about the risks and effectiveness of the new treatment at that point?
Yeah, so when we get to a phase 3 trial, they found the right dose, they've shown it's active. Now we're trying to say, hey, is this better than the standard care? Now, it may not be that drug versus standard care. It may be that drug plus something that's already been established versus the standard of care, right? So the phase 3 trials can be very, very different. But usually by the time we get to a phase 3, there's a pretty good sense about what we can expect in terms of side effects and what are the risks. And the trial is really designed with the goal of saying, how does this regimen compare to the standard in terms of efficacy and safety?
So, real quick question, can you define randomized for those who might not know what that means?
Yeah, so randomized is, generally speaking, it's done by computer, and the treating physicians, the patients have no say in that whatsoever. And so we'll talk about trial, and the patient, after discussion with the team, will enroll on the trial. And then once they've sort of said, yep, you're good to go on the trial, you'll be accepted. And then the computer will tell you which arm of the trial you're going to get to. Sometimes you may know that arm, but in some situations, it may be a trial in which, you take a pill, and that pill may be a real drug, or it may be a placebo, which is a sugar pill or something like that. And those trials do exist as well. And those trials exist when, the standard of care may be to do nothing, right? So it may be standard care is A, we're going to look at A plus B versus A, right? So in that situation, you may be randomized, you'll be just given A plus a pill, and you won't know if that pill is B or if it's a placebo.
And so I know that Deb Maskins is listening, so I've got to ask this. Is that ever a source of concern that you're giving patients a placebo?
So, I mean, I think ultimately it's really important to understand, again, where that trial is at, and if you're trying to, learn the most about a trial, having that placebo really, makes it sort of what's going to call the cleanest, and to get the best data for the trial. And it's really important to understand that when there's a placebo involved, it is because the standard of care would be to do nothing in that spot, right? So it's not like we're withholding an active drug. If there's a placebo, it's because it's been accepted that the standard care would be to do nothing. And now we're just trying to see, and instead of doing absolutely nothing, they do this placebo, and it makes the data, when they're going to interpret it and the regulatory authorities, everything, it gives us a better sense on the efficacy and safety.
Great.
Can I
I know
jump in
we're
here
running.
real quick, Brian? Dr. McGregor, right now, since there is a standard of care, would you ever get a placebo unless it's in a combination setting? But you would always kind of get a standard of care,
Right. So
correct?
if you look at kidney cancer right now, we have so many standards of care. So I don't think we'd ever have a trial where it's like, hey, we're looking at A versus nothing, right? Because we always have
Right.
something we do. So a lot of
Right.
situations now, if you look at one of the trials ongoing, in the situation where patients have had surgery to remove all the kidney cancer, we now know that Keytruda or pembrolizumab is shown to help patients. But now belzutifan, we heard about earlier, there's thought that maybe we could add that to immunotherapy and do even better, right? So there's a trial where everyone got pembrolizumab after surgery, and then patients took a pill, which may or may not have been belzutifan, right? So everyone gets the standard, what I would give outside the trial, and we're seeing does adding this drug make a difference?
Thank you for clarifying that. I just wanted to make sure.
Sure. Thanks, Deb. Dr. McGregor, real quick, if a patient joins a trial and then they change their mind, can they withdraw? And how would they go about that?
Yeah, 100%. None of these trials are binding documents, right? So if a patient signs up for a trial and they have really bad side effects, or it's reached a point where, it doesn't work logistically for them to get in for the visits, by all means, the patient has the opportunity to withdraw from the trial at any point in time. When we think about clinical trials, I always tell my patients, my goal is to give you the best care possible while learning how to treat someone better tomorrow, right? And, clinical trials let us, the patients take on, that responsibility of, partaking in this trial now, so that not only can I learn better, but the whole medical community can use that knowledge to really advance care for our patients.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we got to keep moving along here to topic number 4, which is the practical realities of being in a trial. And it's the cost and the travel and the medical care. What are the lessons learned here? And so Laura and Deb, we're going to put you on the spot here. Looking back, what is the biggest lesson you want to share with folks?
For me, Brian, it's that I really didn't understand all that goes into these trials when I first agreed to do it. I thought this was going to be something that I would know within a year, whether, what the results of the trial were, and I was, mistaken. But, I would say, yes, there are definitely practical considerations that patients need to consider whenever they're looking at clinical trials, like cost and travel and all of that, which are all things I had to think about. But again, I think that having that discussion with your oncologist, looking at the websites of what we've provided, is really crucial, because I do think there's a misconception that you have to travel really far in order to do clinical trial or spend a lot of money, and that may not be the case. So it really is important, especially with the rare subtypes, to look at it from all angles. I'm glad that I did, and I have zero regrets about doing the trial. I would do it again if I had to.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Deb?
Yes, I would absolutely do it again. And I second everything that Laura said. Costs and travel could be a factor, but not always. And as Dr. Haas mentioned, there can be some help in that. I was very lucky to live in a city that was, very close to my clinical trial, and I realized that, but I would do it again, even if I had to travel. And I would also, and I would like to know the doctor's opinion on this. Whenever I've been very lucky, I've been on Sutin for almost 8 years now, which is really odd. But if and when I ever, thank you, Dr. Haas, if and whenever I have to change my drug, I will again look and consider a clinical trial. And I will do that on every drug change that I need to. And I think everybody should consider it whenever they change a drug.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Deb. And I got to throw in a question here we got from Lindsay, a biotech professional in California. Dr. Haas or McGregor, toss up, how is the treatment community working to raise awareness about clinical trials among community oncologists?
So I think there's several approaches. I mean, one of them are, we certainly go out to the community and talk about clinical trials to physicians. The cooperative groups are for community oncology driven trials. So that's another way to educate people. And Brad and I are both a member of the KCRC, which is the Kidney Cancer Research Consortium. And in that we have a website. So I think that there are a number of different ways that we can do it.
Great. Dr. McGregor?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's just all on all of us working together, right? And so we certainly reach out, we have a different network. We have tumor boards, case discussions across the community, and we always talk about clinical trials that are open at any given point in time. You look at every meeting, there's always opportunity to highlight the current trials that are open at any given point where we're able to go and talk with all the physicians that are there and sort of network. So I think it's on all of us as clinical trialists to sort of spread the word about what trials are available. And often once you have one trial that's available, then the doctor, they'll think about it and they'll say, hey, we had that trial. What do you have now, right? And so, trials beget more recruitment.
Thank you. Thank you. We got time for one last message or one more comment. I'm going to go in order. Deb, I'll start with you. If you were going to give patients one message about considering a trial, what would it be, or any other closing thought?
I think I've said everything, but I would say do it. And then, in my case, every year I got a special luncheon for the heroes of for trials. So, that's good enough for me too.
Food. All right. I love it. Laura?
I never got a luncheon, so I'm gonna have to write a complaint. No, I'm not exaggerating when I say I'm literally alive because of a clinical trial. I would not be here if it weren't for being on that clinical trial in Cabo. I've been off treatment for 4 years now and counting because of the success I had with clinical trials. So I was stage 4, and I think that it really is going back to what I said earlier. I would not be afraid to have that discussion with your oncologist. It may not be the right time to consider clinical trial, but you don't know if you don't ask. And like Deb, if I have to go back on treatment again, I will absolutely be having that conversation with my oncologist.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Haas?
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to Glenn Sykes said it well on the chat. If you get side effects or you decide to withdraw from a trial, you don't have to completely withdraw from a trial. It's still really, really helpful to us if you still let us look at your tissue that you might have had to give at the beginning. And also if you are able to even allow somebody to make a phone call periodically to see how you're doing. I'll give the example of the Prosper trial where it was only about 1/3 of the patients that let us look at their tissue samples. And this is a neoadjuvant kidney cancer trial. And to really advance the biomarkers, we really need people to be willing to, it's a gift if you're willing to let us look at your tissue to better understand biomarkers.
Great. Dr. McGregor, the final word?
Yeah, I just want to thank every patient who does think about clinical trial, right? When you enroll on a clinical trial, you're taking on a level of uncertainty, right? We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we hope by doing that, it's going to, again, help you, but help the future as well. And I think, I personally, I see patients all the time, like, listen, if you're going to make the drive into Boston and deal with the traffic, let's do something you can't do closer to home, right? And I think a clinical trial is something that certainly offers that opportunity. And, just be open-minded. Just when you get randomized, just because you may have said, I wanted the cool new toy and I got the boring one, you never know what the future holds. We just heard from Deb, right? She's been on sunitinib for years. And so that drug was perfect for her. So, this is why we do trials. We're trying to learn how we can best treat our patients. And, as you do the trial, no matter what treatment you get, you're going to have people looking at you, closely monitoring you, and working with you and the whole team to give you the best care possible.
Thank you. And I definitely agreed, not driving in Boston, but this summer in Boston, we're going to be having our research summit. We've got another year of Rock the Run. And Dr. McGregor, you've been actively involved with that. I'm wondering out loud if you can't bring a team together in Boston and compete against maybe some folks from Dr. Haas's institution in Pennsylvania. We'll have a little challenge going on in Boston this summer. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate this really insightful conversation tonight. I want to thank folks that are sticking around in the audience. It means a lot to us. Thank you, Dr. Haas. Thank you, Dr. McGregor. Thank you, Laura and Deb. Also to our sponsors, Aveo and BMS and ASI, Exelixis and Merck. Thank you. Couldn't have done it without you. If you'd like to rewatch the town hall or share it with your families, as I said, it's going to be available on our YouTube channel in a few days. Once the video is uploaded, you'll receive an email from KidneyCAN and you'll be able to pass that along. So thank you very much.